Good afternoon, fellow Plexers. Today's video is going to be a deeper dive into a trash guide setup. And because my YouTube channel is really focused on Plex, I give advice on the trash guides. I never really want to do a full setup video. I just want to protect my Plex content from anything that might happen with a takedown request from anything to do with YouTube. So I mainly want to show you some advice for folder structure from the trash guides and how my folder structure I think is even better than that. And then specifically for someone named Chris, who I started the conversation about Plex and the star apps in a Synology group run by the Marius Hosting author. I want to talk about how great those guides are, but how poor they are on their path examples. Marius is a genius at getting containers installed. I love his site, but I don't think he has a trash guide set up, because if he did, he would use different folder structures. So let me explain that with my own examples. I'm into my Synology DS1520 NAS, and these are my shared folders. So every container needs a container folder in a shared folder named Docker. So that's where I am now. This is a shared folder you create before you install any Docker container. Now I have a test Plex server here, and that container is called Plex PD. The PD is for public domain. I use this or a similar server on my older Synology NAS in a lot of my YouTube videos to show people how to do things, because I'm using public domain media that I can actually show playing, to show subtitles and that kind of stuff. My real server shared folder is simply named Plex. Let's get out of the Docker shared folder. So here's my regular shared folder, and here's an example that I use lots of times because it's more self-explanatory. And I simply copied a couple videos I was working on from another server onto my network here, just so I wouldn't lose track of them. So the trash guide has its own structure, which I'm going to show next before I explain how mine might be better. So the trash guides have different installs to follow, whether you're running Unraid or Synology NAS, or whether you want to install under Linux. And this is how they suggest structure. One shared media folder called data, and then they break it down into a torrent setup or a Usenet. Now I use Usenet, so that's what I'll be talking about today. And then they have an incomplete and a complete folder under that. And if you've used sob nzbd for a Usenet setup, you'll recognize that those are really subfolders that you'd have in your sob nzbd folder. So then they do something I don't. Now, I set my trash guides install all up before I discovered the trash guide, so I was doing it without the benefit of this research. They direct acquisitions that are brought in by the different services like Radar, LiDAR, Sonar, and I think Reader, which is for books, into their own specific subfolders. Something that's been requested by Sonar or LiDAR on my systems simply ends up in the complete folder, and it still works easily. So now they have the actual Plex media separated, and then he's showing examples of 4 different libraries. One for a TV show library, music library, movies, and a book library. So let me pause it here, and I'll get on with my example. And I'm back. So let me switch back to my mock-up folder structure, then I'll show you what I actually have. So I'm in my shared media folder called Media PD. And I like the idea of using a sort folder for Plex library types. So I have a sort folder for multiple movie libraries. And if you notice, I don't have any shared folder that involves Plexus or the Star apps or the Trash Guide apps that's uppercase or with any spaces in it. Like I do have this and that folder that are uppercase, and this one, and that one. But anything I've created myself that involves Plex, there's no uppercase lettering or spaces. So Media PD, all lowercase. My sort folders, movie-libraries, other-libraries for other videos, photo-libraries, TV-libraries, no uppercases and no spaces. Now, I can't think of many reasons someone would have multiple music libraries. So this example, it could be just a music library, or you could keep the nested structure and have the music library one level deep. Once you come to the actual Plex media, like the artist name, of course you return to uppercase and spaces, just like you do for the audio. So in the movie library sort folder, you can create different individual movie library folders. So a main one here, and of course we return to normal naming convention for the movie folder and for the actual movie files itself or the subtitle files. So this allows me to have multiple libraries. I can have a kid movie library, one just for DVR purposes, documentary, and a 4K. I could have a stand-up movie library. I could have a concert movie library. You would be surprised how many concert Blu-ray and DVDs are listed at TMDB or IMDb as a movie. You can make a nice collection in a separate library. So let me go into the TV show sort folder or library sort folder. Now, there's a main folder for a regular TV show library. There's another one for a kids. Again, a separate DVR one if you wanted to direct your DVR episodes that have commercials in them into a separate library structure than what you might be collecting with a Trash Guide setup, and even an anime library folder. Now, Sonar is perfectly capable of using multiple root paths. So if you add a TV show to go to this library, you pick that path. If you add a TV show to go to the kids library, you pick this path. And if you're collecting anime too, you select that path. The only downfall in Sonar is the last path selected is the next one that comes up automatically. So you have to be aware of that. If you add 2 anime shows, and then the next show you want to add is a kids show, well, if you don't redirect that route path, the kids show will go in the anime because you use that last. But that's easy to process. Now, I don't use Radar, but Radar can be set up with the same principle. You can pull for a main movie library, a kids movie library, a documentary, a stand-up, a concert. But what you can't do with one instance of Radar is pull the same movie for both your regular movie library and a 4K movie library. You'd have to collect these manually or set up a separate instance of Radar. And I haven't thought about this too hard, but because the R apps, Radar, Sonar, LiDAR, monitor things, you might need a separate instance of Prowler and Saab NZBD too. But if I think about it a little harder and I look at the Trash Guides example, that might only apply to the way I have it set up. Because remember, I have all media going into the Saab NZBD complete folder. But if I directed the first instance of Radar to send the raw files here, and I had another subdirectory called Movies 4K, the second instance of Radar could possibly, I'd have to actually try it, direct Saab to send those acquisitions to the other folder named Movie 4K. I'm not sure how that would work, and I'm going off on a tangent there. So the nested structure works great, especially as you scale up your Plex server. And usually that's what happens when you're running these Trash Guides app. You end up with more media than you thought you would when you started the process. So imagine 4 or 5 different movie libraries that Radar is pulling for. imagine 3 TV show libraries, a main, a kids, and an anime. And then imagine having maybe a couple other video libraries and 4 or 5 different Plex photo libraries. Well, everything that I have nested would now have to be in a flat structure in your shared media folder. You'd have a lot of folders here. And I just don't think that works as well. So the hardest part about somebody setting themselves up for a good trash guides install is proper folder structure. We haven't even talked about the most important part, which is what we're talking about now. So let's go to the trash guides suggested folder structure, and I'll show you how it enables atomic moves and describe that, and show you how my suggested structure does the same. Atomic moves are achieved because there's one shared media folder. So your incoming torrents are directed to this subfolder, incoming Usenet is directed to this subfolder and then into one of these subfolders underneath. And in the same shared media folder is your Plex media. Well, do this test at home. If you have 2 hard drives or even a flash drive, take a big file, 4 gigabytes, 40 gigabytes, and copy it from one drive to the other, and then go make yourself a cup of coffee, have a snack, brush your teeth, and come back, and that 40 gigabyte file will be complete. Now copy the same file to someplace else on the hard drive you just moved it to, and you'll see that that movement is instantaneous. Well, when you're going from one hard drive to another or from one shared folder to another, it's not an instantaneous move. If you're going within this shared folder or within the same hard drive, all that has to happen for that file to be moved is for its reference of where it's located to be updated. But if you're moving it to a new partition table, you have to recreate it. So moving a file is really a copy plus a delete function. So it takes a while to copy a large file onto the same hard drive, onto the same partition, because it has to be recreated. Well, by splitting things up into different shared folders on a Synology NAS or on a Usenet setup, you have to recreate that folder or file and then have it deleted in its original location. To move it within one shared folder or one hard drive, it's instantaneous because the file goes no place. Just the glossary to the file, the index to the file, that's what changes. And that's the beauty of atomic moves. So let me show you my real structure, and then for a Synology specific install like Chris is using, I'll talk about why the Marius Hosting install guides are both wonderful and they leave a lot to be desired when you're trying to figure out your paths yourself. So this is my suggested structure. It's just named easier to remember what's going on. Photo-library, that's a sort folder. I got lazy. I called my shared media folder on this NAS simply Plex. Now, if you have an old Plex install on a Synology NAS that can't upgrade to DSM-7, the actual package of Plex was installed in a shared folder named Plex. So this might be confusing to you. If you've transitioned to DSM-7 or started with a Synology NAS with that version, the Plex container install creates this shared folder called Plex Media Server. So this might be confusing to you if you have an old Synology NAS, but it is not the old DSM-6 or 5 Plex package install. It's simply my shared media folder. So I have a sort folder for every Plex library type, simply named easily. This is not a movie folder, it is a movie sort folder. My main movie library is named movie. So that might confuse people, but it's a shared media folder called Plex, a sort folder called movie, and then a movie folder. And I don't know why my browser's taken so long to load all 6,800 movie titles, but it is. So I have a kids library too, which loaded much faster. And again, you see at this point, I return to using uppercase letters and spaces, and just following the Plex naming convention through my wonderful file bot expressions that took me a while to get perfect. All right, so we know that this achieves atomic moves because everything's happening in one shared folder. This is my acquisition for Saab NZBD, and I don't know if I've mentioned it to Chris yet. Forget about NZB Git. It's not supported any longer. Saab is what you want. So everything lands in this folder, and then the R's detect it when it's there and rename it and move it instantly to whatever library folder. So Sonar is moving most of my acquisitions here and some of them here. I don't use radar, but I use LiDAR. So let me get into my actual Plex music collection, and LiDAR moves things into the right folder. So everything works, and the only deficit I have, as we go back to the trash guides, is I wasn't aware that this is what I'm calling the Saab NZBD folder in my shared media folder, and I didn't realize I could create sort directories to then use to direct the individual R programs to. So maybe I'll change that someday. I would recommend doing it now that you know, right? I didn't know. All right, so this is the point where we look at the fabulous Marius Hosting guides. All right, so what guide is this? Oh, this is just all the Docker container tutorials he has here. All right, so this is part of the Plex install. This is installing Plex through a scheduled task if it's an AMD-based NAS that doesn't have the Intel iGPU with it. There's a different install for hardware accelerated transcoding that you have to use to gain that. If you have the old 9th gen Intel Celeron processor in your NAS like mine has, but we're not interested in that because he uses the same port path statements. So every Docker container has to point to the Docker shared folder on volume 1, and then I defined my container name as Plex PD. He's doing it as Plex, and then the application gets installed in the Docker shared folder in the Plex subfolder. That's how every Docker container works. Well, he doesn't explain his path statements. You know it's volume 1, but what the hell is this web shared folder doing? And there's movies in that. Well, doesn't he have a TV show library? Doesn't he have a music library? Doesn't he have a photo library or another video library? None of this makes sense to someone brand new with both Plex and Docker containers. And if you're a Plex experienced user, but you're new to Dockers on a Synology NAS, this does not make sense either. So let's just continue on showing the other issues. All right, so this is installing Saab NZBD. You could do it as a scheduled task or you could do it with Portainer. Neither method really matters because we're just looking at the path statement. So again, the config files, the application files need to be in the Docker shared folder, and he has you create a Saab NZBD folder to house the application folders once you spin the container up. But now it gets really weird. Let's make this full screen. He's putting the download folder for Saab NZBD into Docker. And then he writes, if you want, you can change the following line to volume 1 Docker Saab NZB downloads with a path to the location of your download folder. Well, that's a nice addition, but I don't know why he'd want his Docker subfolder or his Docker shared folder to fill up with incoming acquisitions. Now, let's go back to my example. My real example is it's going in my Plex shared media folder where all my media is, and it's landing right at the next subfolder level where I have all my sort folders. And they're actually going into that subfolder underneath. So let's compare what mine would be. Mine would be volume 1, Plex for the shared folder, sob nzbd, and then it would just be complete. Now, anything to the right of this is simply the virtual path that the application actually sees that's running in a container.
You have a text message.
Excuse me for a moment. Okay, so the best thing I should do is I should pull up Portainer and show you what I'm doing here. So let's go to containers. This is Portainer where I can access all the running containers. Here's my test version of Plex on this server. My real version has been moved to an Intel NUC running Unraid that points back to my Synology NAS. So we're going to look at sob. Even though I used a scheduled task to create it, that scheduled task no longer exists for me to look at the parameters. But if I slide down in Portainer, I can see my path statements. So this is how I define the container. Volume 1, the Plex shared folder, the sob nzbd subfolder, and the complete subfolder in that. And this is the virtual side of that description. It's simply complete. So let's pull this back up. So instead of downloads, I simply called it complete because that made more sense. So now let's look at the, let's get Portainer up here. It's confusing, right? I know it's confusing. So now my configuration is actually inside the sob nzbd container folder, inside the Docker subfolder, and the alias is simply config. So let me go back to the Marius Hosting guide, and that would be this. So this is exactly the same as what he's using. And then he's got an incomplete path that's actually going inside the container, inside the Docker shared folder. And I don't understand why any of that is set up that way. And all it tells me is that he never used all of these fully to work together. So you see my incomplete is inside my Plex media folder, inside the sob nzbd subfolder, and incomplete's just another subfolder. And why mess with that? The alias to that is simply called incomplete. And the same thing, I set this up so that there's a watched nzbd folder. This folder might just be called watched, but I called it watched nzbd, and the alias to it is watched. So that folder structure to me makes more sense. So let's go on to Portainer. Portainer is a copy and paste. Portainer doesn't move any files around. So this is going to be the same for all of us set up on a Synology NAS. You're going to put the application files in a subfolder in Portainer that you have to create inside the Docker subfolder you have to create, and the alias is just data. So this is the same. There's no issues with that. All right, so let's go to Radar. I didn't install this, but let's look at what he's doing because he does the same thing for Sonar and LiDAR. So he's defining where to put the configuration files. This is the same path I used when I created Sonar. Okay, so now look at this path. He's going to have Sonar look into the Docker folder under a subfolder. Or actually, sorry, he's going to define Radar to put. Okay, hold on. I have to think about this straight for a second. So this is where the acquisitions are going to go. Inside that Docker container folder in a subfolder called Radar, in another subfolder under Radar called Downloads. And this is what's going to be monitored in that same Docker folder to then tell radar where to move the stuff to. None of it makes sense. It's like the libraries are inside the Docker shared folder, which I think is why Chris was mixed up, thinking he had to have library paths inside of Docker containers. It's very easy to get screwed up with these volume mappings. So Sonar I know better because I have it installed, but it's the same thing. This is right, and this just doesn't make sense. None of this should involve the Docker shared folder. It should involve your media shared folder, because again, you cannot achieve these wonderful, fast, and efficient atomic moves that you can that are defined in trash guides as something that you want. All right, so where are we? We're in Sonar. So let's see how my Sonar paths compare. All right, let's get out of this and let's get into Sonar. And again, I checked. I do not have the scheduled task I used to create my Sonar container still available to look at, but we can look at the paths from Portainer. All right, so volume 1, Plex, SOB NZBD, complete. That's where my media is going from SOB NZBD. And now this is the same as Marius's Docker Sonar. Docker shared folder into Sonar, and the alias is complete. So let's look at that, make sure it matches. That's an exact match. Again, he's involving the Docker shared folder for media. I'm not doing that. That doesn't make any sense to me. So, SOB is looking for incoming media to monitor in my media shared folder named Plex from the SOB NZBD subfolder and the subfolder of that called complete. And remember, you might add another subfolder called TV or called Sonar, whatever you want it to if you want to split things up. Now, Sonar needs to be able to move that media someplace, and it's moving it to my Plex shared folder, to the TV sort folder, which I'm using the alias of as Sonar Media, because Sonar only deals with TV. So let's go back and look at the Marius example. So one of these is the monitor path, and one of these is where the finished episodes are going. So this is the monitor path, which again is inside the Docker subfolder for some reason. And this is the library path. You would not put a Plex library inside a Docker container, which is confusing because none of his Docker, Plex Docker installs reference that same folder to find a library that Radar or Sonar is bringing in. So honestly, these are great resources, but he really needs to set up his own setting that achieves atomic moves, because then he'll have good path statements to use as examples, and he really should define how everything's set up so that a follower of his tutorials can see the overall picture and then adjust what he's doing to what they're doing based on a few changes. And that's why I'm showing you my structure. Let's see, where are we? We're in my actual Plex shared folder, I think. Yep, we're in my Plex shared folder, my media folder, and Sonar has access to this sort folder. So then Sonar can then direct anything into any of these actual TV show library folders. If I was to use Radar, the path would be defined as the sort folder, because then I could direct different movies into either the stand-up, the performing arts library, the movie library, the kids library, the documentary, or the concert. And again, I could not use one instance of Radar to also source the same movie into a 4K and a regular movie library. If I only wanted a movie to be in the 4K library and not the regular one, then Sonar could do that too. It could make that split. Okay, what else do we have to show? just Ladar. And again, the media library and the watch library from Saab NZBD are both in the Docker folder. So this is just really kind of like nonsense. Everything's great. These are great guides, but you've got to understand that you're not going to understand these examples. You have to build your path examples based on your own structure. And here's the only thing you have to remember. Everything to the left of the colon is your real structure. You can go to DSM, you can go to the file manager yourself and figure that out. So volume 1 is always first. The shared media folder is next, which in my case, for my regular stuff, is Plex. But if you were following my example here, it'd be media or whatever you named it. And then I really like the idea of sort libraries. And even this extra volume on volume 2, I'm using the same naming scheme. And if you had 2 volumes, maybe you had some TV show libraries on the other volume, like this Media PD2, you'd simply add 2 library paths while just the one path looked for the monitored files from Saab. Which if we go back to Portainer again, let me go into, where am I here? We go back into Sonar and drop down. So you'd have your one config path. You'd have your one path so that Sonar could watch where your media is landing after it's brought in. And if I was pushing a kids TV show library to my other volume, while the regular TV show library was on the first volume, this extra path statement would be similar. It'd be volume 2. It would be whatever the shared media folder is, and then it'd be whatever the sort folder was for the TV show libraries or the actual library folder on that other volume. So you can do multiple volumes. It will break atomic moves when you go outside the main shared folder on your first volume. So there's no way to achieve atomic moves if you're using 2 volumes. But besides that, you don't really encounter that under a Synology NAS too often or an Unraid server if you can just keep adding bigger drives that make up your volume. So Chris, I'm going to end it there. I don't know what else to talk about besides the fact that lots of times you need to explain the whole overall picture and the importance of atomic moves in order to get someone to revamp their Plex library. And actually, I can talk about that. That can be the final thing of the video. So say you've got media all over the place. Well, don't move it to a new structure. If you have the room, copy it over. And if you don't have the room, just work on your movie libraries first and then your TV show libraries. So say I had to move everything from this structure to this shared folder. Well, there's a little trick that works great in Plex. So here's the web app, app.plex.tv. I'm already into my TV show library, and let me edit it. I'll go to Manage, Edit, and I'll click on the Add Folder line. So say this was my old folder structure. And again, this is just an alias defined by the Docker container. Well, as long as the libraries are the same, so I don't care where your old main TV show library was, if it was a flat structure, and now you've copied that library folder to a nested folder structure, it doesn't matter as long as it's the same media inside the copied library folder. You simply click Browse for Media, and this container is set up to, let's see, this container is not set up to see the other volume, but if it was, I might have defined that alias for another TV show as Plex TV Media 2, and I could click on it, and now I'd have a path to the duplicated library structure. And when I save changes, Plex would just scan all that in, and then I could verify that by going to the library mode, changing TV shows to episodes, and then sorting for duplicates. You would do that first, and then you would see your total episode count should be duplicated. If it's not, it means something is named wrong or not matched properly. And to be honest with you, this is a surprise. I don't know why I have duplicates of some of these episodes. I'll have to figure that out. But anyway, once you're assured that everything's duplicated, that means it's scanned in exactly as what it's supposed to be. You can go back, edit the library, and remove the original path and save it, and Plex will not find duplicates once it's saved. And at that point, let me fix this up. At that point, you can go back to your original media and delete that library from that location. So you do not have to lose any custom metadata in Plex to recreate your library structure. That you would do that first, and just follow my example or follow the examples directly from the trash guides. Now, they have their own guides here too. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, that's not. They have a guide for setting up everything on a Synology NAS under Unraid. And let me go to home and I am home. Okay. It's almost like it's two separate sites, and I don't know how to find it right now. Let me pause this, and it'll be my last pause. I had to Google it, but here's a full setup instructions on how to do it under Synology NAS, based on the folder structure that they suggest here, and that'll achieve atomic moves just like mine does. I think you can just follow, if you have a Synology NAS, I think you can just follow all these, again, fabulous Marius Hosting guides. Once you understand that you basically have to trash his paths here, not for the container setup, but for where your media is, and it's really not too difficult to understand. Again, this is real structure, and this is the alias you'll see when working in that container. And I did want to show one more thing, so I'm glad I didn't end the video. And I don't know how to do this without making a long video. But let me go into Settings and Media Management and slide down. You'll see that these multiple root paths are already defined. Remember, this Sonar media is just the alias that leads to this shared folder and subfolder. It leads to the Plex shared folder and the sort folder called simply TV. And then these are the actual subfolders inside that TV sort folder. Kids TV, public domain, TV, which is my main library. So if I wanted to start collecting anime, I just need to create that subfolder, that library folder in the TV sort folder, and I can add the root folder here. And let's go to this. Let me type something I don't have in the kids library. Probably should find this for my grandsons. So, click on the Flintstones, and whatever show you added last, it's going to have that root folder up next. So this would go to my regular TV show library. But if I want to direct it to the kids TV show library, it's that simple. Now I add the show, and Sonar goes to work, and this automatically goes into the right library. And if this was Radar, let me back out of here. If this was Radar, it's the same exact principle. Where are my settings? Media management. You can have the multiple root folders in Radar too, so you can pull for a main movie library. You can pull for a kids movie library. you can pull for a concert or a stand-up or a documentary movie library. This isn't even explained really that well in the trash guides, and the Marius Hosting website doesn't really touch on it. But again, I still call his guides fabulous because you can create the Docker containers easily without knowing anything about Docker. He has alternate installs to use Portainer. I guess I'm just going to keep talking. This is how I define my Plex container. I use a stack. It's simply named Linux-server. That's who I'm using. And if I go to editor, you see everything laid out here. So I'm pulling this image. The container name is called Plex PD, so that's the folder that has to be in the shared Docker folder. Host name is Plex. This is right from Marius's guide, only I'm using my own container paths. This is almost identical to what he's using. I think he's using Plex HW, and the HW signifies hardware acceleration being enabled. And this is a path to the shared media folder, and this is a path to my second volume. Oh, which is, I couldn't see it because I was in the wrong library. So again, one more thing to show. Well, wrong icon. I don't need the Plex HTPC client app that opened on my second monitor. Let me go back to the web app. Let me change to this test server I've been talking about. And now let me go to, I'll go to the TV show library. That's what I was showing before. And now I'll edit this in the folders. So we were talking about you can copy structure to then rescan it in and then delete the old one first. So if I had that going on, I'd browse. Now you see my access to the other volume. So it could just be access to a new shared folder on volume 1. I can click into the main and do this, and if these are a duplicate of each other, it'll scan all the same media and is a duplicate. Once it does that, then you can delete the original. Let's say this is the original, save the changes again, and you've rearranged your folder structure, your shared folder structure, but you haven't lost any custom metadata. So if you had custom collections, if you were using custom posters for any show, you'll keep all that. There's ways to do everything for success. And Chris, you got a Synology NAS. Don't avoid the Marius Hosting guides. They're wonderful. You just have to understand the paths. The trash guides has a lot of valuable information that'll work. And if you have a Synology NAS that has an Intel iGPU, this enables hardware acceleration. And even though it's an old 9th gen Celeron in some of the Synology NASs, it still can hardware accelerate a 4K transcoded stream down to 720p. I have videos showing that you can easily get 5 of those going simultaneously before a 6th stream pulls the whole thing apart. My Intel NUC, the 11th gen i5 in it, can do 8, and I've ran out of client devices to test locally with. I think there's more tank in that gas. All right, Chris and anybody else watching, this is about as in-depth I'll go into a trash guide setup on my Synology NAS, but all the same principles hold true for an unraid install. And again, there's an unraid trash guides installed just like there is for Synology. You just have to search for it. And again, everything's going to be based on the folder structure they suggest, but it can be adopted from my folder structure too. The folder structure is the only hard part about any of this, and I appreciate you guys watching, and have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.